The Catholic Church, as it once existed, has all but been forgotten. The Church today is in ruin physically in many places, most notably in France and the Middle East, but the doctrinal devastation it has suffered since the death of Pope Pius XII has never been fully revealed. This video will explain what caused this destruction and how Catholics can know beyond any doubt that the Church in Rome today is not truly Catholic. Many seeking the truths of the Catholic faith today come close to despair when they see the current unrest that exists in the Church in Rome and the countless controversies and scandals raging in that church today. Then there are the many traditionalist sects, all claiming to possess the truth, all of them holding different beliefs. One thing is certain, the devil is at work in the Church and has been for decades. Some of these truth seekers grow weary and give up their search, simply remaining where they are spiritually. Others believe the Church in Rome is the true Catholic Church and join that church, only to find it is little different in many respects from Protestant sects. Many then begin to explore the shadowy web of traditionalist sects and are unwittingly introduced to a false Catholicism. Traditionalists are Catholics who left the Church in Rome and set up their own churches following the Church Council known as Vatican II, held October 1962 to December 1965. This council introduced a new liturgy, new rites, and modernized the churches. Many left the Church in Rome after Vatican II and the changes in the Mass and sacraments, until eventually few true Catholics remained. This new Mass or liturgy was a sacrilegious parody of the beautiful Latin Mass the Church had celebrated at her altar since the 5th century. Traditionalists wished to retain the Latin Mass and the old rites of the sacraments, changed by Paul VI in 1968 and 69. In the canon, the most important part of the Mass, the Church in Rome falsified some of Christ's very words during the consecration of the wine and omitted others. In the 1500s, Pope St. Pius V taught that such a change invalidates the consecration used by the Church in Rome since the 6th century. Those attending this new liturgy did not receive the Eucharist, and those following such a change, despite the command of a true pope, could not remain Catholic. The Council of Trent condemned the teaching of the Protestants that the canon of the Mass could ever be changed because it contained errors, and this teaching binds all Catholics. Pope St. Pius X reigned in the early 1900s. Because the Church in Rome changed the Mass and sacraments, we know it is not the Catholic Church. Traditionalists are not Catholic because they have no pope. Bishops and priests cannot act without papal permission and direction, not even in an emergency. This was condemned by Pope Pius VI. Pope Pius XII taught that when there is no pope, their sacraments too are invalid. Jesus established St. Peter and his successors to rule his church on earth, and told the faithful to obey them just as they would obey him. He who hears you, hears me. Christ granted the popes the gift to teach only the truth on faith and morals. He promised that whatever they would bind the faithful on earth to believe, he would confirm in heaven. When anyone refuses to obey the Pope, they reject Christ himself, who speaks to us through his vicars. The Church has always taught that those not in obedience to the Pope in matters of faith and morals, also discipline, cannot be counted as members of the Church. Such membership is necessary to gain eternal salvation. This is why we must be certain that those ruling from Rome are true popes. Any time Catholics have a serious reason for doubting a pope was legitimately elected, they must separate themselves entirely from him. Some traditionalists do believe the Vatican II popes were impostors and consider the papal seat to be vacant, but all traditionalists fail to acknowledge that the papacy is the very source, the font, the repository of all tradition, all the truths of faith. They do not accept papal teaching, and like the Protestants before them, do not recognize the Pope as head of Christ's Church. It was discovered in the 1980s that the cardinals who elected John XXIII as Pope failed to obey an infallible, unable to be in error decree made law by Pope Pius XII regarding what constituted a valid election. Like any other election, if certain rules are not followed, the election is not valid, and nothing legislated by the one elected has any effect whatsoever. This is exactly what Pius XII taught in his decree, but traditionalists do not acknowledge his authority. Church law, the 1917 Code of Canon Law, teaches the cardinals who elected an unfit man as pope lost the right to hold another election. The duty to elect then fell to those bishops and cardinals who suspected the election was invalid. These church officials had the strict obligation to provide the church with a true pope, but instead, as had happened in the past, those bishops and cardinals abandoned the faithful and followed John XXIII and his successors. Those bringing the false election to light presented solid proofs to back their claims, but traditionalists refused to examine the evidence and follow the laws and teachings of the Church up to the death of Pope Pius XII. In his decree, Pope Pius XII taught that without a certainly elected pope, all comes to a halt until a true pope can be elected according to church law. No laws can be changed, he taught, because no one has the power to act without papal approval. Doubtful popes must resign, as was the case during the Western Schism in the 1400s. This was the teaching of the great church doctor St. Robert Bellarmine. Because the cardinals and bishops failed to act, present circumstances will not permit the election of a true pope in these times. Many cannot accept this, but it issues directly from the constant teaching of the Church, which Catholics, if they wish to remain church members, cannot contradict. All this has been carefully documented according to the infallible teachings of the Church and church law for those who possess the patience and the level of understanding needed to sort through it all. There are rules that help make sense of things, but even though the Church insists we follow those rules, traditionalists ignore them. But what if this is not the case? How do those seeking to learn the Catholic faith and bewildered by all the confusion they encounter become or remain truly Catholic? The answers will be provided in parts 2 and 3 of this video.